question is like, how would you approach this issue of when the AI will ever become conscious, in your view?
Yeah, I think there's
And how would you convince somebody who, for example, holds the view that AI might become conscious?
Okay, so I think the question is, where does consciousness come from in humans? Like, we can't determine it with respect to AI unless we can figure out where it comes from or where it doesn't come from in the case of living organisms, because they're our paradigm case of consciousness. Okay, so as we were talking about, the materialists have this idea that simple complexity of dead matter on itself will produce it. And as we've said, the Quran says that everything has an aspect of consciousness. Okay. Now, this idea is actually called panpsychism in the literature. The idea that everything has psyche, has mind.
Yeah.
Everything has a mind. Even the smallest particle has a mind.
Yeah.
And then there's the idea, okay, well, if you put a bunch of matter, each little tiny particle has consciousness, yeah? And you put a bunch of them together, then that's what produces consciousness.
But then a mountain should have more consciousness than humans.
Yeah, but then you get the question of, well, actually...
Or a sun. The sun should have more consciousness than like anything else.
Yeah, exactly. And actually what we find is it's not to do with...
I'm great. I'm going along the right lines. Great, yes.
It's not to do with the density of the matter.
Yeah.
There's something else that's going on. And when we look at conscious beings like ourselves, there is a key difference, which is that we have a unified experience. Right? But we have an understanding that we are one thing. We are not, I don't know how many billions or trillions of cells I am, let alone atoms are in my body.
Yeah.
I don't feel like a trillion to the trillion different particles. I feel like one thing. So even if you say that every particle of my body has some consciousness, how does that combine to produce one soul, I'm getting ahead of myself. How does that combine to produce one thing which has the experience of being one thing? Okay, it's called the combination problem of panpsychism. So there isn't a very good answer for this, actually, and panpsychism is a partial explanation because it gives you at least has a degree of explanatory power. The materialists think you just put a bunch of dead matter into boxes of different configurations, and you get consciousness. There's not even an attempt at explanation. Okay, the panpsychists say you put a bunch of alive matter into particular configurations, and you get consciousness. We like at least there's something there because you've got a box full of tiny conscious particles. Yeah, of what?
Frogs. Live matter.
Okay, that's confusing things.
Sorry.
Because a frog has its own conscious experience.
Sorry, I apologize.
Yeah. The question is, how does it combine into one conscious experience? Okay. And I'm reminded here of the Quranic verse which says, talks about, they ask thee concerning the soul. Say, the soul is by the command of my Lord, and of the knowledge thereof you have been given but a little. Okay. In the Holy Quran. And what the Quran indicates, and this is something the founder of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, Hazrat Mirza Islam Ahmad, said, is that actually this isn't something which can be solved through means of laws. You will never have a natural law, even in a panpsychist universe, that will allow this combination. And he says this is actually essentially an act of pure creation by God to produce a soul out of a configuration of matter. Now, what we could say that panpsychism explains is, why do you have souls of different qualities based on the particular configuration of matter? So if you have an organism, let's say in the womb, you have a child growing in the womb, and at some point, according to Islamic theology, a soul is distilled out of it. Okay. Now you could say that the
so go back. Why did you say the soul is distilled out of it? Could you expand on that a little bit? Because, for example, there's somebody sent me a friend of mine sent me a podcast, Joe Rogan, with Thomas Campbell. This guy who believes that we live in a virtual reality simulation, and that the bodies are avatars, and our real consciousness is part of the grand unified consciousness of the universe. But one thing that I investigated in his views, how do you match the body to the soul?
Yeah.
Where does that come from? But Islam has a very unique and beautiful answer to that question.
Yeah, and this is in the Quran, because the Quran talks about after the stages of embryological development, which we know now from modern science stops around what it describes stops around roughly week 16. Yeah. 16 to 20, which is when the flesh starts to cover the bones. Yeah. Which is the fifth step in chapter 23, where it talks about this. It then says, and then we created that embryo, that fetus
Made
into
it
something new,
into a new
into a
creation.
new creation, which obviously means a spiritual creation. Well,
Yes.
I say obviously because the Muslim community, explain that, but it's actually, when you read it, it's an inevitable interpretation.
Yeah.
The new creation is it becomes a spiritual being.
Yeah.
So the Quranic idea then,
And week 17 is about when women start to feel
yeah,
movement.
that's what they call it, quickening, I think.
Yeah.
That's when you start to feel
Movement.
kicks. Yeah,
and
movement.
kicks and things, yeah.
So, incredible harmony between the Holy Quran and scientific evidence here.
But what does the Quran say, and what did the Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, alayhi salam, peace be on him, explain about the origin of the soul? You talk about it being distilled from the body.
Yeah, so he says it's maybe you can get up the exact analogies that he uses, but he says that the soul is latent within the sperm as fire is latent within flint.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's his exact quote. Yeah.
So the idea is that, okay, it hasn't emerged yet. It is an emergent property, but it's inherent, but it has to be activated after a certain level of material development. When you get to a certain level of material development through God's act of creation, it is you become a material body, and the soul is distilled out of that.
Yeah.
Now, I can't give a good material explanation of that.
No.
Right? That is something which I guess I believe on matter of essentially doctrine.
Yeah.
But I mean, we know that is when you start to have movements, and we know that humans are conscious beings, so we have to have some kind of
Explanation. We have some
for
explanatory
it.
framework
Yeah.
for it.
Now, the beautiful thing about Islamic
But
theology,
scientism expects everything to be explained by virtue of natural law, which in itself is an assumption which cannot be proved by natural law, funnily enough.
yeah, well, we'll talk about natural law in a minute. What does that mean? But this is the incredible thing about Islamic theology, is that it has an explanation for everything. Okay, how many people would think that actually Islam talks about panpsychism? It does. It talks about everything having a degree of an aspect of consciousness.
Yeah.
And then it says it solves the combination problem through a solution that many people won't like, which is that actually this can't be solved through a law. This has to be solved through God's creation.
Yeah.
But at least there's an explanation there of how the soul comes out, of why a soul is created in an organism.
Yeah.
And to me, now this is speculation, this is my own thinking,
Yeah.
it explains why souls seem to be of different levels and grades and capacities according to the organism that they're in.
Yeah.
A frog soul, according to Islamic theology, is of a much inferior type to a human soul. Now, it may be that actually it comes from the corresponding material development. Humans have a particular material development that is very advanced, and therefore we have a particular spiritual development that is much more advanced than others. So there is this correspondence between the material development and the spiritual development. The next thing that I think Islamic panpsychism does in this respect is it solves...
IP.
Yeah, I don't know. It solves to some degree. I think it gives a partial explanation. It gives the beginnings of an explanation to the problem of interaction, the interaction problem, which is how does soul and matter, how do they interact?
Yeah.
Right? If you have a soul, let's say you accept at this point, humans are souls, they're embodied souls.
Yeah.
They're souls within bodies, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
there's a communication there. If they are two radically different substances, which is what Descartes said, right? And he was wrong in that respect from our view. If they are two radically different substances, how do they interact? How does one meet the other? But if actually you posit matter as having a conscious aspect, as being conscious in itself, then suddenly there's a medium of communication.
Ooh,
Right?
that's very speculative and very cool.
Yeah, right. So it's like you have the distilled soul,
Yes.
which is like purely spiritual, but it still has a means of communicating with the body because the body itself has a spiritual aspect. It's just not as refined as the soul. Okay,
That's very nice.
so here's the incredible thing.
Which is why I feel my hand is part of me, but it's also distinct in some way. It is distinct in
Interesting.
some way.
Yeah. Yes, but it's still yours.
I mean, this is something I said to I said to my friend who sent me this video of Thomas Campbell, which was that he was asking me what do we think in Islam about these ideas, and I said, well, it's quite obvious because Thomas Campbell says that consciousness is more primary than matter. Yeah, which I think we would probably agree with him, but in a way we wouldn't because
God's consciousness.
If God's consciousness, yes, but. I said to him, well, look, at the end of the day, your body goes through many changes throughout your life. And your body as a baby is not the same as a young person, not the same as an adult, not the same as an old person. You have a radically different body, actually.
Yeah.
And all of your cells are fundamentally new. They're turning over, etc. Except for your brain cells, actually, interestingly. I think there's certain brain cells which persist. But at the end of the day, that shows you that while your body changes over continuously, you maintain a unity of identity throughout your life.
Yeah.
You are still the same person at 50 as you were at 30.
Yeah.
That consciousness, that seed of consciousness is fundamentally the same, which means that consciousness is primary in terms of your identity, and your soul, I should say, is primary in terms of your consciousness rather than your body being primary.
Yeah. That's the ship of Theseus problem, which is, if you take a ship and then you change every brick over time, but not all at the same time, does it stay the same ship? Well, what we'd say is actually, the soul continues and it persists through that.
As long as the captain's the same, it's all right.
That's a better way of putting it.
Otherwise, if the captain changes as well, then yes, it is a different ship.
Yeah, I mean that's a very interesting way that you put it to your friend. What I find really remarkable about Islamic theology in this way is that it gives you explanations of everything. So the question of why are we conscious is explained in a twofold explanation. Everything is partly conscious, number one. Number two, God can distill the different consciousnesses of matter when it gets into specific configurations, i.e. in the womb, into a more rarefied soul. And that explains
and it's the birth of a new thing.
It's a new thing. And that explains why it feels like a new thing. And it explains why you feel like one thing, not a trillion different cells.
Yeah.
So it explains where consciousness comes from. God creates matter, which is conscious, and then God creates the soul through it, which is one conscious, subjective, unified experience. And then it seems to explain, again, not saying that this is kind of established Islamic theology, it seems to explain the correspondence between spiritual development and physical development, because the soul is distilled from the body. So if you have a more advanced material configuration, you will have a more advanced spiritual configuration, if you will. And it seems to give the beginnings of an explanation to the interaction problem, which is that actually there is a spiritual medium between the soul, which is more rarefied spiritual essence, and matter, which has a spiritual aspect. What other paradigm can give you that many answers? None. Right? So now let's come to AI. I mean, reflect on that with
just
AI.
Before we get to AI, I think there's a deeper issue there as well, which is that also explains the method of recording.
Okay.
In the Philosophy of the Teachings of Islam by Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, alayhi salam, peace be on him, he explains that this the reason he starts the book pretty much with the description of where does the soul come from, because he uses that as the basis to then explain, well, if the soul emerges as a new creation distilled from the matter of the body, then the consequence of that is that it has a very intrinsic and natural relationship with the body, which is why,
interesting.
Very
interesting, yeah.
When you act with your body in a particular way, it has a corresponding effect upon your soul. And when you act with your soul in a particular way, it has a corresponding effect on your body. And he explained this. He said, if, for example, you are upset, which is your soul, you are upset, it manifests with tears, sometimes uncontrollably.
Yeah.
Right? If you feign tears, if you're acting on stage and you pretend to have tears in your eyes, your soul feels sad.
Yeah.
If you walk around in a manner which is arrogant with your breasts, chest stuck out and your head held high, walking like that, it creates a sense of vainglory and arrogance in your heart, in your soul. And so he said that this is the basis this is the Islamic understanding of how your actions with your body transmute onto and are recorded onto your soul, and how your soul itself develops over the course of your life into a healthy or an ill one, such that after death, and what the Quran says, after death, your soul, as it currently stands, will become your body.
Yeah.
And within that soul will be a more rarefied soul, which is extracted from your actions.
Yes.
So in other words, your body in the next life will be what is your soul in this life.
Yeah.
And it will be your soul will be comprised of the sum total of all of your actions in your life.
Yeah.
If you've been a horrible, greedy, miserly person, then people will be able to see it by looking at you.
Roald Dahl was right.
What, the twits?
Yeah.
The twits. He said if you behave in a bad way, eventually people can see it on your face.
Yeah.
That's right. My daughter just read that book actually the other day. So exactly, he was right. He had an intrinsic sense of these things.
Yeah.
So that's a beautiful kind of development. And when you think of it like that, you realize that actually what we're doing in this life is we're actually writing our spiritual genetic code for the next life. If you think about your body was given to you. Your health was given to you, your genetic code was given to you. You didn't have to do anything for it.
I mean, even that has a partial correspondence to how your parents acted.
But even then,
lives.
it's like smoking and epigenetics and stuff. But it's very, very
It's looser.
It's loose, right? In principle, if you're ugly, you didn't deserve it, right? Well, you don't deserve it anyway.
Yeah.
Whether your parents did or not, you don't deserve it.
I appreciate you stop pointing to me on this point.
Okay. If you're ugly like you, then, if you're good looking, like, it's a chance. You can't help it. Don't feel bad about it. So, if you are, whatever faculties you have in life, my point is that you get given it, you didn't deserve it one way or the other. But in the next life, you'll deserve it.
Yeah.
Right. You did it to yourself.
Yeah. He who's blind in this life will be blind in the next life. Is what the Quran says.
That's what the Quran says. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so
if you're spiritually blind in this life, you will be physically blind in the physical world of the next life.
In whatever the physical means
because
there.
The next world will be a spiritual world.
Will be spiritual physical. Actually, the Prophet explains in Islam Ahmadiyya Part 5 that the nature of that world is beyond our comprehension of understanding. I mean, what does physical mean to a child in the womb? What does that's not even the correct analogy. What does physical or emotional or mental mean to a sperm?
What does it mean to you in your dreams?
Exactly. So, I mean...
You have a body in your dreams.
Yeah. Exactly. But you're lying paralyzed. So the interesting thing is that when we conceive of this concept of Islamic philosophy, what it means is that what we're doing at the present, we're writing the genetic code of our future life. Death is the point of fertilization.
Yeah.
The time between death and resurrection is Genesis in the womb.
Yeah.
Is your development of that body.
Your Islamic theology.
Yeah, in Islamic theology. And then the day of resurrection is the day of birth.
Yeah.
You come into full-fledged into a new existence.
And everyone will see you.
And everybody will see you for what you are.
Yeah. Just as you can see
not for what you pretended to be.
Yeah. Because you may have covered it in this life, but just as in this life you can see people's deformities physically, in the next life you'll see their spiritual deformities. And the most humble person that you may have been a beggar, may have been, some poor person that you just cast aside may actually be a giant in the next life. Incredibly handsome, beautiful giant that will look down upon you and, disease state.
I saw one of these lovely videos, these social experiments. This company, they came had this guy come to somebody else in university, and he said to him, I don't have any, I don't have any money for lunch. Do you mind loaning me some money for lunch? And the guy was sitting there. He was an African guy, and he was like, well, I've only got these coins, like a few pounds, a few dollars. And he was like, but you can have it. It's okay. And he goes, well, what do you mean you don't have any more money? This is all you got? He goes, yeah, I don't have any more money. This is all I've got. He goes, well, I don't want to take your last few coins off you. And he said, no, don't worry about it. My providence is not in my hands. It is God who provides for me. He said this to him.
Yeah.
And he says, take my money, take it. Go have lunch. It's okay. God will provide for me. And the guy gets out $5,000 and gives it to him. And then he gets out a laptop Mac from this company and gives it to him. And the guy's crying.
Oh, wow.
He's like, I didn't know that, I'm actually homeless. I'm homeless as of a week ago. Couldn't pay my rent. I can't pay my tuition fees for the university. Now I can pay for everything. And the guy takes out another $5,000. He gets $10,000 in a Mac.
Wow.
I don't know if it's staged.
Yeah. Well, you can usually tell people aren't that good actors.
But it was a really good acting then.
No, the people aren't that good.
It was really good acting.
Yeah.
If it was staged. But that shows, you look at the person who is poor and in the dirt and doesn't have a home, indigent. He's giving away his last coins. Why? Because he believed Allah is my provider. Right? He depends upon God to provide for him, and God did.
Yeah. And imagine the provision in the next life. He'll have mansions.
Exactly.
Someone who's a sinner may struggle to get a studio. Let's be honest.
It's virtue inflation. Everybody's doing well these days, and you just didn't make the cut. This is what you get. You get it's a 2x4.
I feel compelled to just say that
we don't know what we're going to be.
God doesn't have a quota though as well.
Yes, that's true. God doesn't have a quota.
There's no fixed money supply. That is the true fiat. Is God's spiritual blessings. The reason why we set out on this quest was you asked, about AI and whether it can develop consciousness, right? So what I think we've tried to at least give some evidence for, give some framework for is our beliefs on what a human is and how a human is conscious. I has a soul, which is created by God out of partly conscious matter. So if you look at AI, which is, a term for software, basically, okay, it's stored on computers and electricity, okay? Our view is that hardware, whatever it is, it doesn't have a soul. It doesn't have God creating a soul out of it, right? So no, it's not going to have consciousness, and it will never develop consciousness. The idea that a series of outputs in your software, as they get better, as they move towards the speculatively named artificial general intelligence, as your outputs get really, really good, suddenly this has a backwards effect on its hardware and its essence, I don't think doesn't make sense, right? Because it's based on the misconception that this is how humans became conscious.
Yeah.
Right? But there's no argument given that this is how humans became conscious.
Yeah.
Materialists.
Well, the argument is that, we can't possibly have God doing it.
Yeah, exactly. Negative theology in its own way. So the argument is, the materialists don't even have an explanation for human consciousness. So how they can then make the leap and say, well, AI is going to be conscious, it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
The framework which we believe makes sense, and I think we've given some good arguments for it, is that humans are conscious because they have souls, and the souls are created by God out of matter, which is living to some degree. If those souls are not created, then simply getting better and better AI is not gonna produce them.
It's just going to mean my work gets easier.
Yeah,
when
exactly.
I'm writing things and researching.
Exactly. So in conclusion, AI is like every other technology, isn't it? It can be
correct.
What was it in? What do they say at the beginning of Blade Runner? It's like anything else. It can be a benefit or a hazard. If it's a benefit, it's not my problem. Brilliant film. So, okay, anything else you wanted to say?
No, that's perfect.
Okay. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Peace be upon you.